This chart shows a very different story to what most people want you to believe. This is a Bitcoin related chart. There's also one for Ethereum. This is the number of active accounts on Bitcoin, and it's not growing since 2018. Here is the same chart for Ethereum. Also, no growth since 2018. So the popular narrative that we are still early, that crypto is still growing, that there's more and more adoption, it's obviously not true for Bitcoin and Ethereum. What's fascinating though is that the prices since 2018 did go up over time. So it's not necessarily the usage that's driving prices, it's something else. Even though Bitcoin and Ethereum are not the same, right? Bitcoin is rather the hardest of the monies, it's a store of value. Ethereum is a technology play to use smart contracts. Even though it appears as if the two assets are completely different, they trade very similarly. Because interestingly enough, they do have extremely similar tokenomics as well. They both expand their supply by roughly 0.8% per annum. Now, Ethereum's supply expansion can drop if it gets used more. That was actually the case right after the merge. When Ethereum moved from proof of work to proof of stake, the chain was used that much that so many ETH got burnt that it had a shrinking supply. That's where the term ultrasound money came from. Sound money just being hard money, ultrasound money being money that goes down in supply. So that's what happened at the beginning for Ethereum. It's not what's happening in the last months. Bitcoin and Ethereum supply expand at the same rate. And it will be very interesting to see what happens with the Ethereum supply long term. Because for Bitcoin, we already know, right? There will be the halving, then the circulating supply expansion will drop to 0.4% per annum. So Bitcoin will never be ultrasound money. It will never drop in supply, but at least the additional supply that hits the market, that will get cut in half in April of 2028. So in a bit over 2 years. There are so many similarities between the two assets. We've got ETFs for both. So that's the number of ETH that's held by the ETFs. This is the number of Bitcoin that's held by the ETFs. And we've also got public companies that buy Bitcoin and Ethereum. For Bitcoin, it's mainly Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy, now rebranded to Just Strategy. For Ethereum, it's Tom Lee's BitMine mainly. What I find fascinating about those charts, right, they compare how much of the entire supply is held by those public companies. How for Ethereum, we approach the Bitcoin balance more and more, but we never overtook it. Interestingly enough, there seems to be some kind of invisible ceiling at around 4.4% of the entire supply. The Ethereum treasury company narrative started in April of last year. That's when everybody got excited, and that's also when Ethereum dominance bounced. So this is how much of all of crypto is in Ethereum in terms of market cap. We had the bottom forming at 7%, and then in the subsequent weeks, Ethereum outperformed the rest of crypto by more than 100%. This year, by the way, that was the move from proof of work to proof of stake. The tokenomics of Ethereum improved, yet Ethereum lost, relatively speaking, subsequently. Then came the treasury company story. The question now is what's going to happen going forward. Let's zoom into this a little bit further. It appears as if we have broken out of the negative trend. There is a potential turnaround. Maybe on a shorter time frame, we now have higher lows and higher highs. Now that's only for the dominance chart. We do not yet see the same for the Ethereum market cap relative to the Bitcoin market cap. The charts look very similar, but we haven't yet broken out. So we are still at our resistance. This is the overarching chart. Again, in April of last year, we saw the bounce. So in the next days, we very much might get the decision whether or not Ethereum continues on its rather bearish trend that has been established at the end of August of last year. I always like to look at relative valuation charts because as the market in general expands and contracts, we do have impacts on US dollar prices, but very often capital also rotates within the crypto space. So sometimes everybody gets hyped about Bitcoin, sometimes about Ethereum, sometimes about the altcoins. And so capital just rotates around. And it's interesting to see where we are relatively speaking. Is Ethereum currently cheap or expensive? What we see over here, that's the Ethereum market cap relative to crypto without Bitcoin, Ethereum and the stablecoins. That's called total 3 ETH. We have been trading in a range. This is a very long-term chart starting in 2017. The dotted line here, that's the average ratio, and we are very close to a somewhat balanced price. Now there's an alternative measure. Instead of looking at all of crypto except Bitcoin, Ethereum and the stablecoins, we can just look at the altcoins that are not in the top 10. Then we get this chart. This is now Ethereum's market cap relative to others. So others is the market cap that's not the top 10. Here, Ethereum tends to be rather expensive, and we have been rejected of a level that's very close to where we are right now. In other words, if we get another rejection here, maybe we're also getting the rejection here. And Ethereum continues on its way down. So the two charts look somewhat similar, but not really, right? Total 3 ES is not the same as the others market cap. And for the fun of it, here is the ratio of total 3 ES relative to others. If this is going up, that means that the larger altcoins tend to outperform the smaller altcoins. And that's happening for the last 2 years. The top 10 altcoins, excluding Bitcoin and Ethereum, did better than all the other altcoins and outperformed by roughly 58%. It seems like this is in general a market concentration move. What we see at the bottom, when the Bitcoin dominance is going down, people in general want to get more risk on, right? They don't just want to be in plain old Bitcoin, but in more risky altcoins. This is also when the top 10 altcoins tend to underperform. When Bitcoin dominance goes up, so when people are looking for safety, that also tends to coincide with the top 10 altcoins doing better than the rest. But this video is about Ethereum and about capital rotation within Ethereum. Now, capital rotation does happen in conjunction with attention, right? When everybody talks about Ethereum, when everybody searches Ethereum, that's also when the price tends to go up. And so why don't we use that information to our advantage? This is the search queries for Ethereum in blue, for Bitcoin in red. And there is some correlation here, right? When there's a lot of searches for Bitcoin, we also tend to see more searches for Ethereum and vice versa. When there's less interest for Bitcoin, we tend to see less searches for Ethereum. The ratio seems to be somewhere around 5x, as in there's 5 times more Bitcoin searches than Ethereum searches. That's at least close to the peaks. But now here at the bottom, it's different, right? Now we have roughly 9 times more searches for Bitcoin compared to Ethereum. And interestingly enough, the Bitcoin market cap relative to the Ethereum market cap is also in the same ballpark. 5x. So many things align here. The adoption curves align, the tokenomics align, the market structure aligns as in ETF holdings and treasury company holdings, and even the interest in the asset in terms of searches aligns with the ratio of the market cap. And so that makes me wonder, is there maybe some way to trade this ratio here based on attention? So I took this data, I downloaded the data, and I plotted the number of searches for Bitcoin versus Ethereum over time. I just calculated this in Excel. And surprise, surprise, there was only 2 times more Bitcoin searches than Ethereum searches at around August in 2018. So I've just plotted this over the Bitcoin to Ethereum ratio. It was best to buy Bitcoin when everybody searched for Ethereum. And so Bitcoin then outperformed. It was the best to buy Ethereum rather than Bitcoin when most people searched for BTC rather than ETH. The average again seems to be somewhere around 4 to 6x, and this chart would imply that maybe Bitcoin, relatively speaking, already gets quite a lot of attention compared to Ethereum, and that maybe Ethereum will outperform. I don't have a very strong opinion. If we are going to break out, then Ethereum does have quite a bit of room to grow. If we don't, then of course the overarching trend can just continue. The next days will very likely decide the future for the next weeks. I do think, however, that this chart here will prevail. So if Ethereum outperforms Bitcoin, then very likely the smaller altcoins will outperform even more, because Ethereum relative to those smaller altcoins is already comparatively expensive. If you got some value out of this video, feel free to give this a like. Feel free to also check out the premium membership. This is where I share my own trades. A link to premium pops up here on the screen. Thanks for watching. See you next time on YouTube or see you on premium. Cheers.